Hello and welcome to Global Social Problems. Today we're going to talk about what are social problems. You would think that a concept so central to sociology as social problems would be easy for sociologists to define, but nope, it's kind of complicated. So I'm going to start with a big, long, complex definition, and then I will break down each part of this so that we can kind of understand it a little bit better. So what are social problems? Social problems are complex, systematic patterns of behavior and social conditions that cause preventable physical, economic, cultural, environmental, or psychic harm, and that are often recognized as problems to be solved by the wider society. So before we jump into there, a quick reminder, we're talking about social problems, not personal problems. So what's the difference between a social problem and a personal problem? Well, a personal problem is private. It's something that's private to you and your experience. It's something that you are directly, personally aware of, something that touches you personally, something that is in your sphere of awareness individually. And it's the result of immediate relations with others. So it's your interactions with other people. It's on a very individual level. On the other hand, social problems are public. So they're not just what's happening to you personally and what's going on in your life, in your mind, in your experience, but it's something that's happening outside of you, whether you participated in or not. It's in the public sphere. And social problems are the result of the organization of social institutions. So what are social institutions? Good question. Let's talk about that. This gets at the first part of the definition for social problems: complex, systematic patterns of behavior and social conditions. These are social institutions. Social institutions are complex and enduring, taken for granted, self-perpetuating, organized patterns of behavior that create and maintain social order by defining social relationships and our worldview or our philosophy of life. Social institutions also include the routines, habits, expectations, and the belief systems that supply those behaviors that we just talked about with particular sets of meaning. So what's an example? What is a social institution? Well, I have several of the most common social institutions listed on the screen: family, government, education, economy, media, religion, science, and technology. Each of these social institutions is an organized set of behaviors. Now, so let's talk about family. Each of us has a family with particular relationships and a particular dynamic. That is on the personal level. What we're talking about here is the institution of family and the expected norms and behaviors on a much larger social level about what family means in this culture. So each of these social institutions differs based on the society or the culture that we live in. Like, different societies have different types of governments, they create different types of laws, they govern our behavior in different types of ways. But all of these institutions work together to create our society, to create the expectations and the rules and the guidelines and the meanings about what is good and true in our society. So if you live in a democracy, you have certain expectations about what citizens, what the rights are of citizens to participate in government. You have an expectation that you will be able to raise your opinions, share your views about what's going on with the government. Now, other governments may not see it that way. So the social institution of government in another part of the world may disagree that citizens have a right to voice their view about the government. When you're part of that system, that is taken for granted as true. So we live in a system that has a particular style of government. It is just the natural style of government. And it governs our behavior. It dictates what we do and don't do, what we think of as legal or illegal, how we are supposed to interact with authority figures, with government as the institution of power. And all of these institutions govern our behavior in the same way. They encourage us to think about life in particular ways. These are the rules of how to interact with each other. And this is the level where social problems live. So social problems do not live in a particular interaction, a problem that I may be having, but it lives in a social institution. It's a problem that a social institution is having. So it's not that I have disagreements in my family. It is that the patterns of family are causing problems. So let's continue to the next section and talk about problems. The next part of the definition, that cause preventable physical, economic, cultural, environment, or psychic harm, has to do with the problem part of social problems. So social problems are a problem because they do some damage, they cause harm. This makes social problems in this respect objective or measurable, that we can look at an object and we can measure how much harm this pattern of behavior causes, who's harmed by this pattern of behavior, what the damage is from this pattern of behavior. That gives us something objective to look at outside of ourselves. And social scientists, academic researchers, government agencies, think tanks, experts conduct research on these patterns of harmful behavior and document the extent of harm and how widespread it is and what the cause is. That gives us this body of evidence that we can look at in this sort of objective way. We can measure it, we can see it. That's this is the objective side of social problems. Part of this harm also includes the way that it affects our life chances. So the harm that is caused is that this pattern of behavior interferes with our ability to achieve what our society defines as the good life. So what we think of as an adequate standard of living, if some pattern of behavior in society prevents us from achieving an adequate standard of living, that's going to be considered harmful. That's harmful in this sense of social problems. However, there is also a subjective element of social problems because not all harmful patterns of behavior are recognized as harmful. So this last part of the definition says that these social problems are often recognized as problems to be solved by the wider society. This subjective element, because we don't all agree that certain patterns of behavior actually are a problem, this introduces this subjective element and gets us thinking about what's called the social construction of reality. So the idea behind the social construction of reality is that it's not that there's some objective truth about society that's out there that we are trying to observe. It's that we create our reality through our interactions with each other. So the dynamic social interactions when we have with each other, when we interact with social institutions, together, we create this shared system of meaning. So as we interact with each other, we determine what is good and what is true and what is right for this society, and that shapes our reality. In that sense, then, harm is recognized as a social problem when the patterns of behavior contradict our cultural values. So that shared set of meanings that we create about our culture, if a pattern of behavior contradicts those values, then we're going to see that as a social problem. So that's another way to say that is that when the actual conditions of our life contradict the ideal conditions of our life. So that wraps up how the overall definition of what a social problem is. So we're going to move on. The next segment, we're going to talk about theories of social problems and how we explain what causes social problems and how to solve those social problems.